There's this girl. I think that she really needs someone to look out for her.
Carlito suffers from a touch of madness.
You must be very careful, Margaret. Bad things will start to happen. Evil things.
It's all for you. No, don't.
Listen to me, Margaret. There are two churches. One follows God, and the other follows something else. This church has maintained power for thousands of years. How do you control people who no longer believe? You create something to fear. The girl is to be the mother.
I'm gonna keep his name.
You've even given it a name. Damien.
God has great plans for you. This child is his way.
It's not real. 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 Who said that?
Where last year gave us new entries to the Evil Dead and The Exorcist series, the past month's menu for horror introduces Late Night with the Devil, Immaculate, and The First Omen, which positions itself as a prequel to the chilling original 1976 film. Marking the sixth installment in the franchise, The First Omen distinguishes itself visually, ranking as one of the most impressively shot entries in the series. Directed and co-written by Arkasha Stevenson, with Aaron Martin as cinematographer, the film bathes early 70s Rome in shades of dark amber and burgundy, evoking a hellish ambience amidst a Catholic epicenter. Starring Nell Tiger-Free, Nicole Soris, Sonia Braga, Ralph Ineson, Charles Dance, and Bill Nye, the narrative centers on an American novitiate confronting a lifelong torment of disturbing visions. Arriving at a Roman church, Margaret uncovers her true purpose in Rome extends beyond her religious commitment, and stumbles upon a dark plot aimed at heralding the arrival of the Antichrist. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're going to be breaking down the iconic classic, before diving into the recently released prequel.
You must be very careful. They believe they can birth the Antichrist.
Don't be afraid.
Your mother.
He chose you,
Your mother.
Margaret.
The Omen, directed by Richard Donner and released in 1976, stands as a cornerstone of the horror genre, meticulously weaving a narrative that delves into the supernatural, the mystery of prophecy, and the chilling realization of evil incarnate within a young boy named Damien.
The son of the devil. He will kill your wife, and when he is certain to inherit all that is yours, then, Mr. Thorne, he will kill you.
The film combines sophisticated storytelling with atmospheric tension, underpinned by stellar performances and a haunting score by Jerry Goldsmith that accentuates its eerie and ominous mood. At the heart of The Omen is the Thorne family, led by Robert Thorne, played by Gregory Peck, an American diplomat of high regard and moral integrity, and his wife, Lee Remick's Catherine, a woman of compassion and depth. Their lives take a dark turn following the birth of their son. Unknown to Catherine, their biological child dies shortly after birth, and Robert, swayed by the counsel of a priest under dire circumstances, adopts an orphaned newborn.
The mother died as your own child in the same moment. On this night, Mr. Thorne, God has given you a son.
This child, Damien, played by Harvey Spencer Stevens, is introduced into their lives under a veil of secrecy, a decision that will unravel their world in the most horrifying of ways. Damien grows under the care and love of the Thornes, yet a series of ominous events and tragic accidents begin to unfold around him, each pointing to an unsettling truth about his origins. The narrative intricacy of The Omen lies in the gradual revelation of Damien's true nature through the experiences and investigations of the characters drawn into his orbit. Patrick Troughton's father Brennan, a priest tormented by knowledge of the apocalypse, attempts to warn Robert of Damien's true identity as the Antichrist.
I was at the hospital, Mr. Thorne, the night your son was born.
I witnessed the birth. What do you want?
To save you, Mr. Thorne, so Christ will forgive me.
His cryptic warnings, initially dismissed by Robert, soon become impossible to ignore as the death toll rises, including a harrowing scene where Damien's first nanny ends her life at his birthday party, proclaiming,
"It's all for you!"
The arrival of Mrs. Baylock, played by Billy Whitelaw, Damien's new nanny, introduces a menacing protector of the child's dark destiny. Her unwavering commitment to Damien and his cause further isolates the child from any attempt to uncover the truth. Robert's journey to the heart of the mystery is catalyzed by David Warner's Keith Jennings, a photographer who uncovers chilling patterns in his photographs that predict a series of deaths surrounding Damien.
At first I thought this was just a fault in the film. It was a strange coincidence. Then it happened again. And the rest, of course, history.
Together, they embark on a quest for answers that leads them through ancient prophecies and biblical lore, ultimately pointing to Damien's demonic origins. After a harrowing journey that takes him to the heart of ancient divination surrounding the Antichrist, Robert Thorne is faced with the unbearable truth that his adopted son Damien is indeed the prophesied bringer of the apocalypse. Armed with the 7 daggers of Megiddo, the only weapons capable of destroying the Antichrist, Robert makes the agonizing decision to confront this evil head-on.
It extinguishes physical life and forms the center of the cross, the subsequent placings extinguish spiritual life.
In the meantime, his wife Catherine meets a tragic fate. After becoming increasingly terrified of Damien and experiencing a series of accidents orchestrated to harm her, she's ultimately killed in the hospital by Mrs. Baylock, Damien's sinister protector. This loss devastates Robert, adding to his resolve to stop Damien. The final act sees Robert, having retrieved the daggers after a confrontation that leads to Keith's death, attempting to kill Damien inside a church. However, before he can commit the act, he's interrupted by the police. In a moment fraught with desperation and tension, Robert is shot and killed by the officers before he can use the daggers on Damien.
No, Daddy, no!
God, help me!
The film closes with a chilling image of Damien, now an orphan with both his adoptive parents dead, holding the hand of the President of the United States at Robert and Catherine's funeral. This hints at the Antichrist's rise to power through the corridors of global influence, leaving the audience with a sense of foreboding for the future and suggesting that a true horror is yet to come, something realized in the sequels, which helped establish the enduring legacy of Damien Thorne in the pantheon of horror icons. For me, The Omen excelled in its ability to blend the personal tragedy of the Thorne family with the larger narrative of biblical apocalypse. Donner's direction masterfully balances the emotional depth of the characters' experiences with the escalating horror of the unfolding prophecy. The film's pacing, coupled with its visual and auditory design, builds a suspenseful atmosphere that keeps the audience engrossed till its conclusion. And through the lens of horror, The Omen explores themes of faith, destiny, and the nature of evil. Robert Thorne's descent from skepticism to belief mirrors the audience's journey, as the film deftly navigates the line between the rational world and the supernatural. In essence, The Omen is not just a story about the rise of the Antichrist, but a compelling exploration of the struggle between light and darkness, weaving the personal and the prophetic into a tale of suspense and horror.
Fears, I have such fears.
What kind of fear, Guy?
Oh, if I told you, you'd put me away.
Tom? Is that you?
Luz? Yeah? I can't do this.
You're a very beautiful girl, Margarita. And you have to understand that about yourself, if only to know what it means to give it up.
Set in 1971, the prequel begins with Ralph Ineson's Father Brennan visiting a church mid-construction and entering a confessional to converse with Father Harris, portrayed by Charles Dance. Brennan reveals a photograph depicting a baby alongside 3 church members, with Skyanna inscribed on the back. Shocked by this, Harris hesitantly responds to Brennan's inquiries about the photograph. He divulges a disturbing church ceremony where a devout Catholic woman was masked, secured to an altar, and compelled by clergy to give birth to the infant pictured. Harris subsequently runs out, with Brennan in immediate pursuit. Their chase concludes dramatically outside as a construction pole topples, crashing through a stained glass window and severely injuring Harris by lacerating the back of his head. As we cut to Rome, we find Cardinal Lawrence greeting Margaret, a young American novitiate and church-raised orphan, upon her Italian arrival. Lawrence, who's been a mentor to Margaret since aiding her through her childhood hallucinations and manic episodes, has invited her to Rome to finalize her nun training. En route, they encounter protesters, with Lawrence noting the mix of demands for better employment practices and the predominance of young atheists challenging authority, including the church, hopeful that devout individuals like Margaret might reconnect the youth with the church. Upon reaching their destination, Lawrence introduces Margaret to an abbey managed by Sister Silver, who describes its role in sheltering orphans and supporting unwed pregnant mothers. There, Margaret connects with Carlita, a teenager marginalized for misbehavior, seeing in Carlita echoes of her own childhood challenges. Now residing with fellow novitiate Luz, Margaret is taken aback to discover Luz's secret nightlife, involving sultry dresses and nightclub outings. Luz advocates for such experiences as crucial before committing to monastic vows, arguing that understanding the world outside the church adds value to their dedication. But Margaret's dismay grows when she finds out that Sister Silver has been confining Carlita in a cramped room for disciplinary reasons, a form of punishment Margaret herself endured as a child. Additionally, Margaret is disturbed by Sister Angelica, who constantly harasses her within the abbey. Compelled by Luz, Margaret ventures into nightlife and provocative attire, an entirely unusual experience for her given how much she'd been sheltered by the church. There at a club, she meets Paolo, who offers her drinks, leading to a night of inebriated dancing and a blackout. Awakening the next morning with a hangover, Margaret learns from Luz that she was brought home before anything unwarranted happened, though Margaret has no recollection of the night's conclusion. The distress escalates the following day at the Abbey during a childbirth Margaret witnesses, where she's appalled to see what appears to be a demonic hand emerging from the woman, causing her to pass out. Terrified by what she believed to be a hallucination, Margaret hastily exits the Abbey. Regathering her senses, Margaret encounters Father Brennan, who urgently seeks her assistance in locating Skyanna, depicted in the photo he shows her. He reveals that Skyanna resides within the Abbey, endangered by certain factions of the church, and warns that strange things will begin to happen around the child. With Brennan excommunicated from the church and denied entry to the Abbey, and Margaret being a newcomer, he believes that she can aid in finding Skyanna, who is destined to be a witness to dire events. Initially reluctant, Margaret is left with Brennan's contact information in case she changed her mind, and the following day, Margaret intervenes after seeing the disturbed Sister Angelica sharing a drawing of a pregnant woman with Carlita, deeming it inappropriate and forcing the nun to back off. The situation escalates as the nun, soaked in gasoline and with a noose around her neck, declares it's all for you from an upper floor balcony before setting herself ablaze and jumping to her demise. Convinced by Brennan's earlier warnings and now suspecting Carlita might be Skyanna, Margaret seeks him out. When she does so, he elucidates the division within the church, those earnestly following their faith versus those aiming to consolidate the church's influence. With dwindling church attendances, the latter group has resorted to drastic actions to reclaim authority. Brennan, now excommunicated for opposing these practices, shares the chilling details of the rite involving the birth of a child fathered by Satan, identifying Skyanna as this child. Given all they've witnessed, Margaret and Brennan concur that Carlita is likely Skyanna, and he reveals the church is orchestrating a rite where Satan will conceive the Antichrist. This ritual aims at bringing about the beginning of the apocalypse, which the church believes will drive the masses back to its fold, thus restoring its ancient dominion. And so, Brennan tasks Margaret with uncovering hidden Abbey documents about Carlita's birth. He suggested her birth timing on the 6th day of the 6th month at 6 a.m., aligning with the devilish sequence 666, would verify her identity as Satan's offspring, necessitating her rescue. Additionally, he mentions the potential of a 666 birthmark on Carlita's body as further evidence of her infernal lineage. Disturbed, yet skeptical of Brennan's assertions, Margaret seeks assistance from Priest Gabriel to access Carlita's birth records, but he refuses. In her conversation with Carlita, Margaret learns of the girl's affliction with voices and ghastly visions, which Margaret initially attributes to hallucinations based on her own childhood experiences. However, Carlita's inquiry into the certainty of these being mere hallucinations coincides with a riot incited by protesters, during which Margaret experiences a vivid hallucination of a demonic assault visible only to her. Amidst her terror and convulsions, Sister Silver observes with disapproval, and following the tumultuous events, Silver and the nuns address Margaret, suggesting her mental stability is waning, compounded by her alleged paranoia exacerbating Carlita's situation. Not only do they bar Margaret from further contact with the girl, but they even question her readiness to take her vows. While being driven home that night, Margaret encounters Paolo on the sidewalk and halts to engage him. Visibly distressed at seeing Margaret, Paolo apologizes, admitting his ignorance. When she urges him for clarity, he points at checking for a birthmark before a sudden car crash violently ends his life, with Margaret witnessing the horrific scene where Paolo is cut in two. Stricken by the incident, Margaret is left to grapple with their sorrow, haunted by nightmares of spiders that night. On the day that Luz is to take her vows, with the Abbey's community gathered for the ceremony, Margaret exploits the opportunity to infiltrate Silver's office, uncovering a concealed passage. This leads her to a room housing a cabinet filled with files labeled Skyanna. Among these, she discovers photographs of various malformed and deceased infants, each marked by a 666 birthmark, and so Margaret secures all the documents and attempts to flee with Carlita. However, as Luz's ceremony concludes, they're intercepted by the nuns during their escape attempt. In the ensuing conflict, Margaret spots a birthmark inside Carlita's mouth amidst the girl's anguished screams. She manages to conceal the documents before the nuns detain and confine her to a small chamber, where she's tormented by visions of the self-immolated nun. Luckily, that evening, Father Gabriel facilitates Margaret's escape, having retrieved the hidden files and disclosed his covert collaboration with Father Brennan. With Carlita under surveillance, they elude capture and convene with Brennan to examine the files, deducing Skyanna as the church's endeavor to produce Satan's progeny. The documents chronicle numerous failed attempts, with most offspring perishing shortly after birth. But a missing photograph from the files, held by Brennan, which features a baby with a 666 birthmark on her scalp, leads them to conclude that this child is not Carlita, whose birthmark is in her mouth, but a second living satanic child. Recalling Paolo's final words about checking for birthmarks, Margaret, with Brennan and Gabriel's assistance, discovers a 666 mark on her scalp, identifying her as the infant in Brennan's photograph. This effectively triggers the return of her suppressed memories from the night at the club. We realize that after passing out, Paolo had actually transported her to the Abbey, and in a concealed chamber, Margaret was then bound to an altar and subjected to a ritualistic assault by the devil, witnessed and sanctioned by Sister Silva and other members of the clergy. Confronted with the reality of her pregnancy with the Antichrist, Brennan and Gabriel rush Margaret towards an abortion clinic, only for their vehicle to be violently intercepted by the church's followers. The crash results in Gabriel's death and Brennan's unconsciousness, while Margaret experiences an accelerated pregnancy, culminating in her blackout as church members take her. Regaining consciousness, Margaret finds herself restrained on a bed, with Cardinal Lawrence revealing his complicity in the conception of the Antichrist, proclaiming it to be a measure to restore the church's influence and save souls. Amidst an assembly of nuns and clergy, a cesarean is performed, extracting twins from Margaret, a disregarded girl and a boy hailed as the Antichrist. The procedure concludes with Margaret being sutured up, leaving the clergy to celebrate the boy's arrival. Margaret then feigns acceptance of her role, seizing the moment to stab Lawrence with a concealed scalpel as he hands over her son, under the pretense of wanting to hold him. Her act of rebellion escalates into a violent confrontation with Silva, who's revealed to be her mother. In the chaos, Luz, revealing her betrayal, stabs Margaret, who then witnesses the clergy securing the baby boy. Silva then commands the room to be set ablaze, leaving Margaret and her daughter to face imminent death. But unexpectedly, Carlita intervenes, rescuing them from the inferno. As they flee, a demonic entity, the jackal-like Satan responsible for Margaret's impregnation, perishes in the flames, emitting a hellish cry. In a covert maneuver, the church then eradicates the Thorne family's infant, supplanting him with Margaret's son, hence aligning the narrative with the original film's premise.
Then he breathed no more. The child is dead. Dead. The child is dead.
My son is dead. I don't know whose son I'm raising.
If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Thorne, I'd like to help you try and find out.
Years later, Margaret's sanctuary with Carlita and her daughter in a remote cabin is disturbed by Brennan's arrival. Despite initial hostility, Brennan clarifies his peaceful intent, cautioning them of the church's knowledge of their survival and its deadly intentions. He leaves them with a chilling revelation. Margaret's son, Damien, christened as the Antichrist, is not only alive, but ascending in power.
I never want to see you again.
You'll see me in hell, Mr. Thorne. There we will share out our sentence.
The conclusion of The First Omen may catch viewers off guard. especially those unfamiliar with the 1976 original, or potentially even those who are, given the stark contrast in how the narratives are presented. As the sinister events of the original film unraveled, Robert's journey led him back to Italy, where a grim discovery awaits at the supposed grave of Damien's mother. There, he finds the remains of his biological child, killed by cranial trauma, implied to be the priest's doing, alongside the skeleton of a jackal. The revelation is clear. Damien's birth mother was a jackal, making him the offspring of Satan. But the First Omen introduces a twist by positioning Margaret as the unwitting mother of the Antichrist, necessitating a shift in the established lore to achieve a more harrowing effect. For me, the adaptation draws parallels to the disturbing ritual in Rosemary's Baby, and Margaret's horrifying realization that she was presented to a demonic entity, visually represented as a jackal with semi-human features, intensifies the film's dark themes. The transformation of the jackal's role from Damien's mother to his father, and unsettlingly his grandfather, represents a significant lore alteration in The First Omen, yet even more profound is the portrayal of the cult responsible for the creation of the Antichrist. Unlike the original Omen, where Satanists seem to permeate society at various levels, including the Catholic Church, The First Omen suggests a direct complicity of the Church itself, or at least factions within it, in the Antichrist's arrival. Ralph Ineson's Father Brennan, adopting Patrick Troughton's 1976 role, divides the Church into two factions, one righteous and the other, driven by fear of growing secularism and religious decline in the 20th century, believes introducing the Antichrist will revitalize faith. This strategy might also align with an apocalyptic vision anticipating the end times and Christ's return as foretold in the Book of Revelations. This narrative revision offers a new perspective on Father Spoleto, portrayed by Martin Benson in 1976 and Anton Alexander in 2024, previously thought to be a mere Satanist. Now, he's seen as part of a larger Catholic plot to usher in the Antichrist for the Church's gain, adding layers to his character's remorse witnessed by Robert Thorne after a disfiguring fire in The Omen. A notable addition involves Sister Silva, played by Sonia Braga, who, in a surprising reveal, is identified as Margaret's mother. She had earlier been depicted as a volunteer in a demonic ritual, and despite her maternal connection, shows no remorse for the destined fate of her daughter and granddaughter. This twist recontextualizes her actions and the Church's involvement, deepening the narrative's complexity and the moral dilemma it presents.
Margaret's one of our worst behaved children.
What if she has another episode?
Then you must tie her to the bed.
Within the established canon of the original Omen trilogy, Damien's fate is well known. His dominion is nearly absolute until a divine intervention by Christ himself terminates his reign.
You have won nothing.
The narrative arc concludes Damien's journey, yet the First Omen introduces an extension to the lore, hinting at the survival of another entity, Damien's twin sister, now under Margaret's care. Despite Margaret's presumably more virtuous guardianship, the outcome for this child remains uncertain, given the ill-fated attempts by the Thorns to nurture Damien in a similar vein. This opens up intriguing narrative possibilities regarding another demonic offspring, much like The Omen 4, The Awakening, which introduced us to Damien's daughter.
The cross, upside down. Your father taught you that? My father is your father. I don't understand.
Directed and co-written by Arkasha Stevenson, The First Omen delves into the harrowing parallels between the relinquishment inherent in nunhood and the visceral journey of motherhood. It explores the notion of childbirth as a transgressive, almost parasitic experience, reminiscent of themes explored by Cronenberg in his films. However, the movie's adherence to its Omen legacy curbs its innovative drive. Set roughly 2 years before Donner's original, the story shifts away from the young Antichrist, Damien, to the peculiar happenings within a Roman orphanage linked to his birth. Here, a nascent conspiracy within the Church, aimed at summoning the Antichrist to rekindle faith among the disillusioned masses, begins to unfold. Central to this plot is Sister Margaret Dano, a lifelong devotee of the Church on the verge of taking her vows. But her resolve is tested by Father Brennan's ominous discoveries and her own unsettling visions. Stevenson navigates a precarious path, balancing her unique vision of terror with the narrative obligations of a decades-old franchise. This balancing act presents its challenges, as enriching the film with original horror concepts sometimes clashes with integrating established elements of the Omen series, such as Father Brennan's investigations and the arcane objectives of a clandestine cult. The endeavor to align with The Omen's legacy, while also venturing into fresh horror territory, results in a tension between innovation and tradition, causing the film's originality to recede whenever franchise imperatives gain prominence. The original Omen, emerging in the aftermath of The Exorcist, succeeded in capturing a similar disquieting aura without relying on the genre's accumulated tropes, thanks in part to the fresh perspective of a seasoned Hollywood professional that was unversed in horror. The effectiveness in Donner's direction lay in his restraint, lending impact to the moments he chose to engage fully. Fast forward 4 decades, there's now an expectation that specific soundscapes, including choral cues and chanting, are necessary to elicit the desired emotional response. The First Omen sidesteps this for the most part, but the primary drawback of the movie is its predictability. The narrative's end is predestined to align with the commencement of the original The Omen film. The certainty of the Antichrist's birth on June 6 at 6 a.m. removes any potential suspense about its outcome. With that said, Stevenson's rendition emerges as a refreshingly inventive entry into the religious horror genre, weaving together a series of really creative choices. For a first-time feature film director, her approach is bold, deliberate, and visually captivating, and she crafts a narrative that intensifies with unease as Margaret delves deeper into the horrifying truth. However, despite expectations for The First Omen to offer nods to its predecessors, the film overly depends on replicating scenarios and character fates from the original saga, scarcely offering original interpretations or updates. Familial archetypes and events, such as a guardian to the demonic offspring and Father Brennan peddling demon child theories, alongside an "it's all for you" moment, are revisited. This made much of the plot feel a bit predictable once things begin to kick into gear. Cinematographer Aaron Morton's work is noteworthy for achieving a visual continuity with Gilbert Taylor's cinematography in the original The Omen, while still maintaining a distinct identity. This careful balance allowed The First Omen to stand on its own while also nodding to its predecessor, creating a seamless transition into the narrative universe of Donner's film. Despite its strengths, The First Omen shares unfortunate similarities with the recent release Immaculate, directed by Michael Mahan in terms of structure and theme. But here, the constraint of a predetermined ending limits Stevenson's film compared to the freer narrative arc of Immaculate. Nevertheless, both films underscore the talent of their directors in challenging conventional filmmaking norms. It's not a bad film, but it's not a spectacular film either. The movie achieves moments of unease and nails the church's moral decay, mainly through its score, visual details, and performances, and the cinematography really helps carry much of the weight. Nell Tiger-Free, known for her roles in Game of Thrones and Servant, delivers a standout performance as Margaret. Her portrayal is a comprehensive display of talent, capturing the transition from initial excitement to bewildering concern, and finally, to overwhelming terror as a conspiracy unfolds. Free's ability to convey a wide range of emotions with convincing intensity stands out, making her role a highlight of the film, while Nicole Soros delivers a compelling performance with Carlita, as a child torn between prophecy, the machinations of the cult, and her desire to break free. Maria Caballero also manages to add layers to the story. The evolution of her character from a light-hearted companion to a dangerous religious adherent contributing to the film's more intriguing plot points. However, talents like Charles Dance, Bill Nye, and Ralph Ineson are underutilized, serving more as narrative placeholders than fully realized characters. And while the performances are commendable, they can't pull The First Omen out of the inescapable gravity of the original. If this were an original film like Immaculate or Late Night with the Devil that didn't have ties to a legacy, or have the job of tethering into existing lore and characters, I'd be more forgiving, and the movie would have had a better chance to stand on its own 2 legs, daring to do whatever it wanted with regards to lore and continuity. But with the movie literally calling itself The First Omen in an attempt to secure fans of the original series, it's hard not to point out how much this movie depends on the real First Omen film, while still having the goal to change the mythology to facilitate the story it wants to tell. With that said, it's a solid horror that is competently put together, and for a first-time feature film director, Akasha definitely shows a lot of promise, and I'm really keen to see what she does next. The First Omen might not reach the pinnacle of 2024's cinematic offerings, but positions itself as a commendable and audacious piece within the landscape.